in an earlier post, I talked about my dad's old Remington Model 512-22. I did a little post on that, and I mentioned two other guns that also hung on the wall of our home the whole time my brothers and I were growing up. And the other gun in that three-gun assortment is this Stevens Model 58 bolt-action 12-gauge. And I did a little bit of Google research and could find really very little information on the Stevens Model 58 shotgun in regards to the caliber, but did find a couple of gun forums, and the one consistency I saw on the little bit of information I could get is that this particular model gun was manufactured between 1933 and 1945. So the latest this gun could have been made was 1945, according to that information, which is really, again, that's kind of cool to think about how old this gun is, and it's still in really great shape. Hadn't been shot much. I don't know how much it was shot before Dad acquired it, but best he could remember, he thinks he traded for this shotgun a 410 that he had, and he didn't remember all the details of that 410 other than he said it was a really nice gun. But if memory serves him correctly, he traded one of our great family friends, one of Dad's two best friends, maybe Dad's best friend, Don Baird, his son Dennis, when Dennis would have been a young man and probably a teenager at that time, I guess. And anyway, Dad thinks he traded that 410 and in return got this Model 58 12-gauge and a Remington single shot 22, which ended up being my first gun. Actually, I think it was also my brother Ace's first gun, and then it was my first gun. And then just a handful of years ago, I thought, man, it'd be kind of cool if Dennis, I don't know, that might have been his first gun. And so Dad was going down, Mom and Dad were going down to see him, and I gave him that gun and said, give this back to Dennis. I said he may get a kick out of getting that gun back after all those years. And so I haven't talked to Dennis since. I need to follow up with him and see if his story, his recollection of those gun trades, or that gun trade, if that was the same as Dad's. Anyway, a really great old shotgun. I'll tell you just a real quick story involving this old gun that occurred in 1973, November the 22nd, and that was happened to be Thanksgiving Day. Big Ace and I decided we were going to go duck hunting back at Brays Lake, which was about 125 acre lake, about a mile through the woods, up and down the hills, back behind our rural home. And so Larry took this shotgun. I had a Mossberg 410 that I had just recently received for Christmas. I took it, and Larry took along some slugs, some slugs for hunting, for deer hunting. Anyway, on the way back, we saw 3 deer. Long story short, Larry shot one of them. We field dressed that deer, he did, and he threw that deer up over his shoulders. I'll never forget that, and you can just imagine the blood running all over him. So I grabbed up the Dad's old Model 58 that he was using, and Larry's game vest full of his, duck calls and shotgun shells and slugs and so forth. I had my game vest on, I had my 410. Man, I took off skedaddling through those Missouri hills back in there behind our old neighborhood. Mike, you'll remember that, of course. And man, I was excited, and I got home and I was telling everybody in the neighborhood that Larry had shot a deer. And maybe one day I'll tell the rest of the story. Is really cool old gun, still in great shape. I'm going to do the same thing I did with that Model 12 of Dad's and just clean it up a little bit more and then get that back to him. But for a gun that's that old, man, this thing, it's really tight. Everything works on it really well. That clip there's almost no rust on it anywhere. It clips in there nice and tight. And they only made, according to the information I could gather off the internet, they made a little bit less than 30,000 of these guns, and that's almost nothing. I mean, there's a lot of guns that have been in production for a number of years, and they've made millions of them. And this particular model gun, they made it, apparently, according to the information that I saw, made it 410, 20, 16, and of course this 12 gauge. So I can't find on it where it says what choke it is. Usually on a shotgun, it'll have it on the barrel, and maybe I just haven't found it, but I'm pretty confident this is probably a full choke. I'm going to go outside and shoot it. It's windier than snot, but I'm going to take a piece of cardboard up there and tack it up to a tree and get back a little ways. Just for those of y'all who don't know anything about shotguns, you may be interested to see and curious to see, you know, what comes out of a shotgun.
So I took the old 58 back there behind the cabin and ran a few shells through it. And this was the first time I'd ever shot that gun in all these years. And I thought that clip, I assumed it held 3. As it turns out, it only held 2, which makes sense because for most game animals in North America, at least in Missouri, 3 shells is the maximum you're legally allowed to have in your gun. So anyway, I put, those were 7.5, 12, 2 3/4 inch, 7.5 shot, 12 gauge shells, of course. And I got up there about, I don't know, 30 feet away or so, 25, 30 feet. And just shot, stepped back about 12, 15 feet or so after I tripped on that limb, and shot again a little bit above it. My intention being just to give folks, and I was curious what kind of a pattern that shotgun threw, but also just to give those who are watching this an idea. So that lower shot there, you can see the diameter of that pattern's about probably 5 inches or so, and just being back about 12, 15 feet, and you can see how much bigger that pattern gets. And the further back you get, the wider the pattern. Interesting how a lot of that shot held together tight. You can see where it made those 2 holes. That's a slug on the left I referenced earlier. That's a single projectile, weighs around 400 grain, I should say, approximately. What would that be? 10, 12 times bigger than a 22 long rifle bullet, approximately, depending on what kind of bullet. Maybe a little bit bigger, but you'll see when I shoot that darn dog. That's a standing dead dogwood tree. You can see that piece of wood, that heartwood that shot out the side. Watch it again here. I slowed it down. That dogwood is an exceptionally dense, hard wood, and man, it just, I didn't hit it dead center. If I would have, it might have blown that darn tree in half, but it hit that heartwood, kind of went off to the side a little bit, that bullet did, and just blew out that big old chunk about 2.5 feet long. But a lot of energy coming off of that 12 gauge slug. And for those of you who are deer hunters, those of you who are, if you've never hunted with a 12 gauge slug before, it's something to consider, especially in this brushy country we've got here in Missouri and big parts of Arkansas and so forth, at least in southern Missouri. Pretty substantial.
So I just got back in from shooting the old 58 out there, and I got to tell you, when I shot that slug there, that third shell, I realized that's the first time that a 12 gauge slug, a rifled slug, has been shot through this shotgun since Thanksgiving Day of 1973. And that's the only time Big Ace ever went deer hunting, the only time he ever shot a deer, and he always regretted it. He said he always felt bad about shooting that deer. Anyway, I just had to laugh when I shot that and realized, man, that's golly, what is that? 50, that's getting close to 50 years ago, 49 years ago. And the rest of the story, I may not post this. Well, if I don't, you'll never know it. But I think enough time has gone by that the statute of limitations on this won't apply, or will go into effect. But so we got home. I told about everybody in the neighborhood that Larry shot a deer, and whenever Larry came through the woods and in the backyard, Mom and Dad came out and checked that deer over and realized that Big Ace didn't have a doe tag. Big Ace had a buck tag. It was bucks only. And back then, there were only certain parts of Missouri you could shoot doe in. You had to have a special tag, and anyway, and it's still the same way. But in any event, Mom and Dad were fit to be tied, and I'll never forget Dad was absolutely beside himself. And I can remember he was saying, I'm going to get fined, and I might go to jail. And boy, old Big Ace was in trouble. And they wanted to make darn sure he didn't do that again. But we took that deer and we put it in a wheelbarrow and we put it inside. we put that darn deer in a wheelbarrow in our garage. In our garage, We covered it up with a tarp. Of course, Dad, Big Ace, and myself, and I'm sure Mark was out there too, our little brother. He would only been about 10, but he was probably, I'm sure he was, well, I know he was observing this. I remember him being there. And we took some old drop cloths, and we I don't remember, we taped them up or how we got them up, but we covered up the windows on the front of our garage, on our roll-up garage door, covered up the door, the side door of the house to the garage there had a window. We covered that up with a towel, and I think there was a back window. We covered it up, and boy, Dad swore us to secrecy. He said, "Don't you," he said, don't you boys tell anybody. Don't you breathe a word of this to anybody. I think that was his exact words. Don't you breathe a word to this to anybody. You don't tell anybody about this. Well, it was too late. I had already told everybody in the neighborhood, and I'll never. Steve and Mike, I remember, and I think Jim might have been down there. They're like looking to grow. Where's that deer? Where's that deer? Don't tell Dad. He doesn't think I told anybody. He didn't know I told you guys. Anyway, somehow we kept the word relatively quiet. That night, under the cover of darkness, we took that poor deer in that wheelbarrow with a pick, a couple of shovels, and our Coleman lantern. Back when you put gas in them and you pumped them up, we took that Coleman lantern back in the woods under the cover of darkness. And man, I remember looking over our shoulder and Dad's like, you guys be quiet now. And we went back in the woods and we dug a hole. And we probably 3 feet deep, which in that kind of soil we have around here is mostly rocks. That was some digging. But we dug a hole big enough to bury a live man in, and we put that poor deer down in there, and we buried it and covered it up and put leaves over it. And again, I'll never forget. We came back to the house. Dad's like, "Don't you boys ever tell anybody about this." So I may get a spanking. I don't know. I may be in trouble if I do decide to post this, but. Anyway, that was the first and last time Big Ace went deer hunting. And, we sacrificed one deer and learned a real valuable lesson, actually a couple of lessons, which that's the rest of the story that I'll maybe tell someday. But Dad, hopefully you'll forgive me. I don't think anybody's going to come looking for you, the game wardens or the FBI or anybody. And if they do, don't worry about it. I'll make sure Big Ace takes all the credit for it.